same sociologist I quoted earlier wrote an article for Christianity Today and said, the most violent husbands in America are nominal evangelical Protestants who attend church rarely, if at all.
Welcome back to Stand Up Dude, the podcast where we stand for truth, and we are inviting men to be the men that God created them to be. We're your hosts, Stuart White
and Tim Bisogno.
And today we've got an amazing guest with us. We are honored to welcome her to the show. And joining us today is Professor Nancy Pearcey. She's one of the leading thinkers of our time, and her book is making waves in all the right ways right now. It's called The Toxic War on Masculinity, How Christianity Reconciles the Sexes. And we cannot wait to talk with her about it. It is just an awesome thing, and honored to have her here today.
Big time.
And just to kind of give you guys a little bit more here, Professor Pearcey she's authored many books, but in addition to the war on masculinity, her earlier books include Love Thy Body, answering hard questions about life and sexuality, The Soul of Science, Saving Leonardo, Finding Truth, and she also has received 2 ECPA Gold Medallion Awards for How Now Shall We Live, co-authored with Harold Fickett and Chuck Colson, and Total Truth.
Wow.
All amazing books, too. These books have been impactful in my life and in Tim's life. They've been translated into 20 different languages, and she is professor and scholar in residence at Houston Christian University. A former agnostic, Professor Pearcey has spoken at universities such as Princeton, Stanford, USC, and Dartmouth. She has been quoted in the New Yorker and Newsweek, highlighted as one of the 5 top women apologists by Christianity Today.
Let's go, Nancy.
And hailed in the Economist as, this is my favorite one here, America's pre-eminent evangelical Protestant female intellectual. That is a mouthful and an honor there, too. So, Professor Pearcey, welcome to the show. We are so glad to have you with us. We've both been impacted by your work, and we are excited for our listeners to hear your heart and your research. So, let's dive right in. First off, you noted that Christian men who attend church regularly tend to test out better on measures of love, engagement, and faithfulness than what popular culture often suggests. So could you unpack that a little bit for us, what the data shows and what it means for Christian men today?
Yes, this is really exciting data because it was very surprising to me as much as to anyone else, because we've all been inundated with secular media saying that if men have any notion of male headship in the home, that will turn them into overbearing, tyrannical, oppressive patriarchs. I'll give you just one example. I had a whole page of them in the book. But the co-founder of the Church Too movement, which followed the Me Too movement, had this to say. She said, the theology of male headship feeds the rape culture that we see permeating American Christianity today. And the social scientists were listening to this and saying, well, where's your evidence? You're making these accusations, but where's your data? And so, ironically, the good thing about Christian men being targeted was that they got studied. They got the social scientists were like, let's take a look and see, this is an empirical claim. And there were both psychologists and sociologists. There's about a dozen studies that I quote in the book. And in fact, Christian men test out. Well, let me give you the stats. First of all, they looked at the wives. The wives test out as saying that they're the happiest with their husband's love and affection.
So good.
And oh, by the way, I always get asked, did they interview the wives separately?
Oh, that's funny.
Oh, they did.
That's actually a decent question.
Yeah. Fair enough.
It is. Psychologists know that in cases of abuse, you can't do that.
Yes.
You can't have them together because the woman won't say anything.
Right.
Anyway, it is the first question I get. But most of these studies are very large public databases. So yes, they were interviewing them as individuals. evangelical fathers spend more time with their children, 3.5 hours more per week than secular fathers.
Oh, man.
They have the lowest rate of divorce, 35% lower than secular men.
That is not the stat that's out there.
Let's back up.
Okay.
You're right.
I'm just rolling.
I'm
I'm just saying I've been told over and over and over that we're no better than the Christ followers than the non-Christ followers. But this is good news.
I'll get my last stat out, and then we'll come back to that. The last stat actually is abuse and violence.
Oh.
And Christian men who are, like you said, committed, church-going, test out the lowest. They have the least amount of domestic abuse and violence. And sometimes a quote will help crystallize it. So let me give you a quote. The researcher who did the largest study was a sociologist named Brad Wilcox at the University of Virginia. And to give you a sense of his stature, he writes in places like the New York Times. So this was actually a New York Times article, and I'll give you a direct quote. He said, "It turns out that the happiest of all wives in America are religious conservatives. Fully 73% of women who hold conservative gender values and attend church regularly with their husbands have high-quality marriages."
Wow.
So this is solid empirical research. It's not, pep talk from some religious leader. It's solid facts. And so we should be very confident about bringing it into the church to encourage men, and also bring it into the public square to counter the secular narrative.
So I grew up in church. My dad's pastor of First Baptist, and I know you're in Houston. Wore my Houston hat for you today, by the way. Big Go Stros. And
Appreciate it.
Yeah. And I just was always told that Christian marriages, unfortunately, were no better than non-Christian marriages. Like the stats were just like 2% difference. Like, man, that looks bad. And that's how I grew up thinking, man, I got to be really, really, really careful. So maybe it served a purpose. Yet you're saying it's more like 35 instead of 50. So that's good news. I don't know where that stat I was
how did they
told.
get that so wrong?
Yeah.
Well, the first pushback I always get is the same. I always get people say, but haven't we always heard that Christians divorce at the same rate as the rest of the culture? In fact, in my research, I found that it's one of the most widely quoted statistics by Christian leaders. Because like you say, they're trying to motivate us negatively. But actually, the social scientists went back to the data, and they made a very important distinction between men who are committed and authentic in their faith and attend church regularly from nominal Christians. And America has a lot of nominals because we have a more religious heritage than many other cultures. And nominal Christians, when they studied them, they were radically different, shockingly. So first of all, their wives report the lowest level of happiness.
Ooh.
They spend the least amount of time with their children.
Wow.
They have a higher rate of divorce, even higher than secular men, 20% higher than secular couples.
Wow.
And the real shocker is they have the highest rate of domestic abuse and violence of any group in America.
Wow.
And so the same sociologist I quoted earlier wrote an article for Christianity Today and said, this is another direct quote, "The most violent husbands in America are nominal evangelical Protestants who attend church rarely, if at all." So this is what we're up against. And what you guys are up against in a ministry to men is, on the one hand, how can you encourage and support and affirm the men who are doing well, that following God's design is going to work to give them a better marriage and a better family. And then how do you reach out to these nominals who are claiming an evangelical identity, on a survey like this, for example, they might check the Baptist box, but who actually don't attend church very often. And they hang around the fringes of the Christian world enough to pick up the language of things like headship and submission, but they incorporate secular meanings into those words. They don't have biblical meaning. And so we need two very different forms of discipleship, to reach out to those men who are at the fringes and disciple them into into real faith, so that they begin to see their marriages and their families flourish.
Man,
yes.
Thank you. That was the gift. Thank you for the division there of the whole group all calls themselves Christians, but one of them is just, it's the words, and one of them it's real, and how to minister specifically to the ones that are marginal, that have some horrific stats according to what you just read. So
yes, and so many of the studies, like you said earlier, many of the studies just lump them together. I don't think any previous studies thought to divide that.
Yeah.
And so, of course, the statistics are skewed, because you're getting men who are better than secular men, and you're getting men who are worse than secular men. Mm-hmm. So, of course, the numbers will be misleading.
Yeah. It throws off the average for sure.
Thank you for that. So your book also speaks of two different, competing scripts for masculinity. What are they, and how do Christian men navigate between them?
Yes, I love this. It's a sociological study again. And I put this at the front of the book, because this book has actually been more controversial than any other book I've written.
All right.
Which surprised me.
Good job. Seriously, way to go.
Because, Love Thy Body is about cutting edge issues like abortion and homosexuality and transgenderism. I thought that would be more controversial.
Yeah.
But in the Christian world, masculinity is more of a trigger word.
Wow. So Nancy, we started this thing in Stand Up Dude in 2021, and from out of the gate, I hate to admit it, but we went about 5-6 months, and the vitriol hate that we got was astonishing, like 1,000 to 1. And so we basically hit pause and said, let's figure this thing out, because we couldn't even respond to the negativity because it was so frequent and overwhelming, to tell you the truth. So I'm glad you told me this. I'm learning so much that it's because we were on a landmine. We already knew we were standing over one, but it sounds like of all the things that you've written about, this was the one that the most.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I with all my books, I do a lot of reading groups so that I can kind of rub off the rough edges. And when my reading groups would tell their friends they were going through a manuscript on masculinity, invariably the first reaction was, whose side is she on?
Wow.
Very defensive. Yeah. And most men simply assumed that a book written by a woman would be, a male-bashing feminist.
Yeah, I love it. I'm so glad you're here because of that. You a smart, wonderful, creative woman that is incredibly knowledgeable, and according to your bio, insanely smart, which is pretty obvious, but it's on paper, that wrote a book on this. Again, that's a woman. So thank you. That's why I had to have you here.
And then when the book came out, there's a follow-up here. The very day the book came out, there was a huge explosion on Twitter. I was attacked viciously for about six weeks or so by Christian egalitarians. Well, there's one group in particular. It's a 40,000 membership group, and you may know the leader is Sheila Gregoire. I don't know if you know her, but she's a public figure, so I don't feel bad saying her name.
Good.
Because she's written some books of her own. But what she does is, if she doesn't like a book, she tells all of her followers to go attack it. And that's what happened.
No.
I was attacked for several weeks. It was very, very lively on Twitter. So before and after the book came out, it's been incredibly controversial. And by the way, when that finally died down, there were some people on the other side. We have kind of the red pill Christian, the manosphere type Christian. A friend of mine called them the bros, the evangelical bros, something like that. Yeah. And they attacked it for not being conservative enough, because it's not a rip-roaring defense of complementarianism. And that's part of what, on both sides, they said, you're not complementarian or egalitarian, and you need to be,
Okay.
And I was
According
like, wait a minute. I didn't want to get trapped in this tiny in-house debate. I'm an apologist, and my main goal is to equip Christians to enter the secular world. And so a good bit of the book is just taken up with, where did the secular script for masculinity come from? You know, if you want to stand
Great question.
if you want to stand against a social trend, you need to know where it came from and how it developed. And so that's my interest, is helping equip Christians to recognize and have a critical grid. I'll just give you one example of why that's so important.
Okay.
One of my graduate students wrote me an email not long ago saying she now teaches high school. And she said, all of my male students are fans of Andrew Tate. You know, they're even using Andrew Tate quotes in the yearbook. I said, where do you teach? At a classical Christian school.
Oh, no.
So if we're not teaching a strong, solid, healthy, biblical sense of masculinity, we're losing our young men in particular. You know, they are absorbing the secular script because they don't have that critical grid in place to recognize it. So that's a lot of what my book is about, is how to get that critical grid in place so that our young men are not swept up into secular culture.
Yeah. So where did this narrative come from? The toxicness story of masculinity. You said to find the beginnings of where it comes from in culture, so you can, you know, in essence, confront it. What was your study find there?
There's a couple important turning points, but it starts much earlier than most people think. You know, I thought, third wave feminism, 1960s.
Yeah. Okay.
But actually, it's much earlier. It starts with the Industrial Revolution.
Okay.
Because before that time, men worked alongside their wives and children all day on the family farm, the family business, the family industry. And so the social expectations on men focused much more on their caretaking role. You know, you had to be patient and kind to your wife and children because you're working together all day. And even a secular historian put it this way. He said the colonial definition of masculine virtue was duty to God and man. I love it.
Yeah.
And so how did we lose that notion of masculine virtue? The Industrial Revolution took work out of the home. Of course, men had to follow their work out of the home into factories and offices. And for the first time in American history, men were not working alongside people that they loved and had a moral bond with, you know, the family members. Instead, they were working as individuals in competition with other men. And it's a very different work environment.
Yeah.
And that's when you see the literature start to change.
Yeah.
Already in the 19th century, you saw people begin to protest that men were losing that caretaking ethos and becoming self-centered, egocentric, you know, driven for success and achievement in the workplace, greedy and acquisitive. Those are some of the words of the 19th century. And even turning work into an idol. I thought it was interesting how many times I saw that word used many times in the literature of the day, that instead of finding their main identity and loyalty with their church and with their family, men were starting to get their identity from their work. So that was actually something very new. It hadn't been that way before.
You know, and also the wife and the children are now only getting to know their tired father. They're got no more words left, father. Let me just lay down, father. I handled 84 problems at work. Please don't ask me to handle a problem at home. Yeah. So that's what, when they got separated, of course, you know, the writing on the wall would be also that the kids didn't have the masculine figure in the home for you know, they get it for 3 hours with the tired dad instead of the 15 hours of the working with the family dad, and how he handles relationships, how he handles hard things, how he handles decisions, how he handles the mailman, you know, all of these little pieces that you're learning as a child, gone from a male figure. Yeah.
Yeah, there were several books written at the time about how boys were changing. Girls still had their mother in the home, so they at least had a day in, day out model of what it meant to be a woman. But boys no longer had a day in, day out model of what it meant to be a man. And so historians say, you know, this was boys' first identity crisis. They no longer knew what they were supposed to be doing.
Oh, boy.
And even the major psychologist of the day put it this way: never before in American history has the American boy been so wild and so undisciplined because the only people there to discipline him are, women. His mothers. Now there were mostly female teachers. Sunday school was women. And so boys were growing up without very much masculine influence in their lives. And commentators at the time remarked on that boys' behavior was growing worse. And when they grew up, these boys, they called them the wild boys. They brought that behavior with them. So the 19th century saw a huge increase of drinking, gambling, crime, prostitution, gang violence.
Yeah.
All of that grew dramatically in the 19th century, partly because these boys were coming from the farm into the city to find work. So again, they were losing any sort of sense of accountability because there was nobody around, the family, village, church. And so this 19th century is known for being the century when our social problems ballooned. And today people will say, that's just the masculine character. They're just more naturally prone to sin and vice and lust. No. It was the product of the first generation growing up without fathers.
Wow.
That was the real cause.
Man, that's so good. I want to pivot into that, into another question. As far as fathers go, because that's something our heart is largely toward in this show is men as fathers. Like, there really aren't, everybody likes to think that there are all these extra paths you can take in life. And it's like, really, you get married, you have a family. These are the key things that have to happen in order for society and humanity to continue on. So for fathers or men who want to be fathers, what practical steps can be taken now to invest deeply in their sons and shape them in a healthy masculine way for that next generation so that we don't have that again? Because obviously we still have to work. We still have to do all these things. So what is the solution?
Oh, yes. Again, the history shows, it gives us a lot of answers. For example, we all know that today fathers are mocked and ridiculed in the media.
Oh,
They're always the butt of the joke.
Big time. Yeah. It's amazing. I share that with people and they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, you didn't notice? Yeah. I mean, they're weak. They're misdirected. They're silent and they're stupid. They're always stupid and they're almost always lazy.
Yep.
Yes.
In media, fathers.
One of my sons loved the Bernstein. Especially. And the commercials, Bernstein Bears, the children's literature. I don't if you're familiar with those books. The father's always the bumbling idiot.
Always.
And even the kids are smarter than the dad.
Totally.
So where did that come from? Again, when men were taken out of the home, for the first time, they were not really in touch with the family dynamics anymore, compared to actually living and working with their family. And so they didn't know their children as well. They didn't know their needs, their interests, and so on. And again, already in the 19th century, you see the same literature. They begin to portray fathers as irrelevant and incompetent and out of touch and superfluous, not really necessary for the family. And so if we know that that's how it started, the solution, of course, then has to be reconnecting fathers to their sons. And this is a difficult one because you can't, undo the Industrial Revolution. But the pandemic actually was very inspiring because Harvard University did a study. And by the way, this is not in the book because it's more recent. Harvard did a study in which they said a lot of fathers worked from home during the pandemic. And their finding was during the pandemic, 68% of fathers said they got closer to their children and they don't want to lose that.
Yeah, I read that somewhere. That's a beautiful stat.
And so what it means, too, is that fathers do want to be involved with their kids. We tend to get the idea, the modern message is that men get most of their fulfillment and sense of identity from their work. But if you ask them on anonymous surveys, in my book, I give some anonymous surveys, and then they'll admit that they get their identity and sense of fulfillment just as much from being a father.
Wow.
And we think, mothers are more into motherhood than fathers are. Well, and we've been taught that. Margaret Mead, the famous anthropologist, said, motherhood is natural, biologically based. Fatherhood is a social construction. Well, it turns out this is not true. They're doing studies now on the biochemical changes that happen in a man when he becomes a father. they actually grow new neurons in the brain. One psychologist says you grow a dad brain.
Wow.
You grow a dad brain because you actually grow new neurons and your oxytocin rises.
Yeah.
You know, oxytocin is the bonding hormone. We always knew that when mothers give birth, the oxytocin rises.
Yeah.
But now they're finding it happens to fathers as well.
Really?
It's stimulated by the tactile sense. So you have to actually be holding and cuddling and playing with the child. But if you do that, the father's oxytocin rises so that he bonds biochemically with his child.
Far out.
And the latest research, by the way, this was really surprising. A man's oxytocin is rising all through the 9 months of his wife's pregnancy.
Super cool.
Really?
So that men are biochemically primed to be fathers. It's not that fatherhood is only a social construction. It's just as much biologically based. You know, God has equipped men with the biochemistry that they need to be strong, committed, loving, engaged fathers.
This explains why I craved root beer floats from Sonic while my wife was pregnant.
That's exactly it.
I had probably 3 or 4 a week.
Yeah. That's so true. I can attest to this, though, because I have 3 kids. My youngest is 8 years old. It's girl, boy. So my only boy. When he was born, I worked for a tech company, and in that company, I got 4 months of paternity leave, which a lot of people would be like, oh, that's stupid. You don't need that. But in that time, I felt like I had all of this like deeper bonding than I ever got with my girls, even though we're really close. But it just was this special thing. I'm like, I get to be here. I don't have anything taking my time or attention. And to this day, we're really close. We're really tight. You know, and so it makes sense now. It was the oxytocin.
It was. And they have some studies. You know, when I started writing my book, I had the same thought that you just mentioned. I felt, you know, the baby sleeps most of the time. And when he's awake, he needs to feed, you know. So I thought, I didn't think there was anything to paternity leave. And then I read the studies and they found just what you've just said. They said men who get a chance to have paternity leave do bond more closely with their newborns. And that lasts the whole rest of their life.
Yeah.
And we know
that's the best.
And we know that father involvement with their children is like the key to success in life, success in school, you know, confidence in your friendships.
Love it.
And even following the parents into their faith commitment. There was a really good study, as a 35-year longitudinal study. It won all kinds of awards. So it was a really good study. And it was asking the question, how do children follow in their parents' footsteps in terms of their faith commitment? And they found 2 surprising things. One is fathers matter more than mothers.
Whoa.
When I tell my students
Man, you could
that,
get in some trouble saying that, Nancy.
That's it. When I tell my students, the female students all say, that's not fair.
That's not fair.
Yeah, it's just the data.
I think fair
what was the
sometimes.
fact?
Yeah. Wow.
But it's not that mothers don't have influence, of course, but I don't think I remember the numbers. It's 68% for fathers. It's 40-something for mothers in terms of the impact that they have on their children's faith commitment. And the second one is, though, it has to be a warm, loving relationship. In other words, if a father is a pillar of the church, you know, a moral exemplar, has perfect theology, but he's perceived as cold, distant, and authoritarian, then the kids won't follow him.
Nope, they will not.
That's heavy. That's really heavy.
Wow. You know, you mentioned, I think, when the father left the home, the children found themselves, or at least men or boys, I think you said undisciplined and wild. And I couldn't help but think, I think that lost needs to be added to that list, because I think maybe boys growing up that worked along their father just intuitively felt like they knew what they were going to do with their life. And then me being my age now, growing up, my dad was out of the house. He pastored a mega church, and so he was gone a lot. And I lost my identity in knowing what I wanted or needed or dreamed of even doing in my life. If you would have just said, well, if you could dream, you know, what would I would have to say, I don't actually know yet. I don't know. And that lasted till I was about 28, not 13. And so, so praise God that, you know, things change, and the perfect story was written where I get to participate in God's timing with that now.
Yeah.
We know now, how harmful it is for fathers to be out of the home entirely, right? That the boys who have no father in the home do worse in school, more likely to be addicted to drugs and alcohol, more likely to end up behind bars. But it actually started with fathers being out of the home most of the day, because technically they were still home. Yeah. But we're so used to fathers being out of the home, we don't realize how traumatic it was at the time. At the time, 19th century, there's all these books and articles written on the loss of the father. Yeah. Here's a book that said the father is the mainstay of the home, and yet he's never there. Or the person who was the most influential woman of the 19th century, the head of the Christian Women's Temperance Union, puts it this way. She said, God is our father, and yet the prototype of the divine is out of the house from Sunday to Sunday. They didn't have Saturdays off yet. So she was talking about how our young people, especially our boys, going to connect with God when the prototype of God is not even there through most of the week. Wow. Yeah. And so there was a lot of traumatic writings, they really experienced it in a way that we've kind of lost touch with. Yeah. One historian put it this way: boys lost their connection to the adult male world. Because, the father obviously was their main connection to the adult world. And then another a psychologist puts it this way. He called it industrial fatherlessness. Because, technically men were in the home, but there was a kind of industrial fatherlessness in the sense that they weren't there, for most of the day. So I do spend some time in talking about solutions. Good. I talk about various ways that men can tweak the workplace and have more time with their families. After the pandemic, a lot of men said, they preferred to keep some sort of hybrid situation where they could work part-time from home or remote work. I interviewed, a lot of them are personal stories where I interviewed men. One of them was a graduate student of mine who's married to an IT professional in California, and he came home during the pandemic. And when I talked to him, he said, well, since I was home, I decided I would be the parent who made lunch for the family. And because I was home, I could take the kids to soccer practice. I could be involved in the homeschooling. And then he said this: the time I used to spend commuting to work, I now spend praying with my wife. Wow. And I thought, this is what we need to hear. Just anecdotes, just stories of men who've done that, who found ways to work around the workplace. Yeah. He said, I'm never going back to 40 hours in a cubicle. Good for him. So good. I love it. Your kids need you. Yeah.
So you write in your book about how traits labeled toxic often have good ends when rightly ordered. Could you please share some examples of masculine traits that are misunderstood and how they can be reoriented towards their virtuous ends?
Yeah, so one of the first questions that I got, from my reading groups was, well, what are the differences between men and women? So I had to put this right at the front of the book, which is, guys, let's recognize the basic creational givens, right? Men were created to be stronger, larger, taller, faster. They have 90% greater upper body strength, and because of testosterone, they tend to be on average more aggressive, more risk taking. And as Christians, we need to find a way to affirm these as good. Yes, this is how God made men. Heck yeah. And so, yes, in a fallen world, they can be twisted. The metaphor I use is the software and the virus. Often we look at men and we see the virus and we call it toxic, but we don't say, well, but what's the software? How did God originally create men? Great. And how can we affirm that as good? I'll give you one more study because this was encouraging to me. It was another worldwide study where it was an anthropologist who said, yes, there are differences. It was the first study ever done of concepts of masculinity. Not of men, but of concepts of what it means to be a man. And he said, even in spite of differences all around the world, all cultures hold to a core idea of what it means to be a good man. And he summarized it as the 3 Ps. A good man will provide, protect, and procreate, meaning have a family.
Yeah.
Or if you're single, build into the next generation. Provide, protect, procreate. And I thought, this is great. These are not Christian cultures. Many of these cultures had no Christian background. And so what it does, it shows us men are made in God's image. And they do know that there's unique masculine strengths not given them to get whatever they want, but to serve, to provide, to protect the people that they love. And they have this innate universal knowledge. This gives us a much better way to approach these issues. Most men don't respond well to being called toxic. Yeah. Nobody would. But is there a way that we can affirm and support and encourage that inner sense that men do have of what it means to be the good man? And that gives us a much more positive way to approach these issues.
So in your book, The Toxic War on Masculinity, you point out that the Bible actually calls men to be, it's kind of a paradox, like both tough and tender, courageous, caring.
Sounds like Jesus.
Yeah. How can men practically root their strength and identity in Christ, as Tim just alluded to, so that their masculinity reflects the fullness of God's character, not just the distortions of culture.
Yeah, well, you just kind of answered it when you said be like Jesus, but I think that it's more it's more impactful if we recognize how Jesus was standing against his culture. We've grown up in Sunday school hearing stories, and we don't realize that much of what he did and said was revolutionary for his day. Like, if you know something about Greek and Roman culture, the early church was born into the Roman culture, and its view of women and its view of men, it had a very low view of women, for example. Yeah. And a lot of girls were killed, either through abortion or infanticide. It was very rare for a Roman family to have more than one daughter. They had a token daughter, and the others would all be killed.
Wow.
And the sexual ethic in Rome, I had no idea. If you grew up on Greek and Roman myths, you have no idea what the culture was really like. It was totally accepted for men to have sex with just about anything on 2 legs. That they had prostitutes and courtesans, and they went to brothels regularly. But the most common adultery was with slaves, because slaves were right there in your household. And boys and girls, men and women, homosexuality was rampant, pederasty was rampant. And so
what is pedophile?
Pederasty is a young male with an adult male.
Oh, boy.
When we see the New Testament entering that world, we have much more respect for what a big challenge it was just to communicate a Christian sex ethic, especially for men.
Wow.
Because women already were expected to be faithful, loyal to their husbands. But it was perfectly acceptable for men to commit adultery. Cicero, the great statesman Cicero, literally says, husbands, if you catch your wife in adultery, you may kill her.
Yeah.
But if a woman catches you, if your wife catches you in adultery, she may not lay a hand on you. That's a direct quote. Man. He says, that's the law. So it was actually more challenging for men than it was for women to learn the Christian sex ethic and to live to live up to God's standard sexually. And in fact, it took several hundred years. Yeah. Augustine, 4th century, 300s. Augustine was still scolding men for having sex with their slaves.
Wow.
There's parts of the church fathers we don't usually hear about. He was saying, he literally said he was scolding men for having sex with their slaves, which he said is a daily occurrence. So it was still it was not easy for men to really change their lives to live according to the New Testament sex ethic. And then you asked about Jesus. Well, again, so many of our stories of Jesus have been turned into, staid little Sunday school stories with pastel colors, like Jesus blessing the children. That is definitely one of the most Sunday school stories ever, because Jesus is holding little children. Right. But that was actually a revolutionary act, because children were seen as having very little value in the Roman culture. You remember Aristotle said a human is a rational animal. So before the age of reason, you practically weren't even human yet. And so children were often beaten. They were often mistreated, even in respectable families. And of course, fathers had the right to kill the child if he wanted to. I mean, he had the legal right to kill his child if he, got angry at him.
Wow.
So, and of course, a culture that has a low view of children has a low view of women, because women spend so much of their time
probably a low view of God
raising.
too.
Pardon?
Probably a low view of God as well.
Well, we're talking about the Romans. They had gods.
Yeah, they had a lot of
They
them.
were polytheistic.
Yes, you're right.
Well, and that's a good point, though, because their polytheistic gods were also having sex all over the place with each other and with humans, right?
Really?
Zeus was constantly raping human females.
Yeah.
So, the gods set the tone for Roman men. The gods had, especially Zeus, had sex with both men and women. There's a reason Cupid is a boy.
Oh,
Actually.
Interesting.
wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Good gosh.
You never know all these things. Like,
I know.
We get the glossed over, pretty up version of all
Pretty
this.
upped.
Yeah, prettied up. I made that up.
I kind of liked it.
To finish the story of Jesus with the children. So when Jesus, now you understand better why the apostles or the disciples said, get rid of these children, and Jesus says, no. He was not only affirming the value of children, but also the value of women, whose life is centered so much around children. So that was completely different. The overtones, the message of that was very different from what we think of today.
And maybe even with slaves too, right? I mean, if they're mistreating women, they're mistreating children, they're certainly mistreating slaves. So it's like just to have the picture or the story, the illustration of children gathered around Jesus, it was a lot more than just about the children. It was he was smashing the lies of culture, man. Yeah, wow. Thank you so much. I just loved. I didn't know this. Yeah.
There's a whole book on how Christianity created the idea of children. That in the New Testament times, the Roman culture did not value children. We think of children as special, unique. They warrant special care, special attention. That was completely new with Christianity. There's a whole book on it. I think it's called "When Children Became People."
Wow!
And it's fascinating just to see something that we just take for granted. Remember, our Christian influence has become like the wallpaper. Even as Christians, we no longer recognize how unique it is. So this book was great. It said, even our concept of children came from Christianity. It did not come from the surrounding pagan culture.
Wow.
That's amazing.
So I got some more. Thank you for that. I got more questions. I know that you have limited time today, so we want to respect that. I know, many of our listeners, though, just they struggle. They wrestle with shame and regret, or just confusion about really what it means to be a man today because of, thus your book has just the response of your book. The writing of it means something's going on in culture, so thank you. But how does the gospel free men from the cultural labels and failures that and empower them instead to live out a redeemed, Christ-centered vision of masculinity?
I think it helps a lot when we recognize the secular script for masculinity, because, a lot of the hostility is not against men, it's against the secular script for masculinity. I'll just give you one example. In the book, I deal with the rise of Darwinian evolution. And many of us think, what? That's just a scientific theory. But it had a huge impact on social norms of masculinity, because social Darwinists immediately began to say that the men who went out on top in the struggle for survival, well, let me give you a quote. They would be ruthless, brutal, savage, barbarian, and predatory.
Wow.
So this began to be part of the secular script for masculinity, and it's still today. It's social Darwinism. The term grew out of favor, so now it's called evolutionary psychology. But there's a best-selling book called The Moral Animal, and he says, again, I'm giving you a direct quote, human males are by nature oppressive, possessive, flesh-obsessed pigs. Giving them advice on successful marriage is like offering Vikings a free booklet titled How Not to Pillage.
Golly.
Wow.
And this is a best-selling book.
Wow.
And there's an older book called Men in Marriage that was just reissued. And he says, men are by nature violent, sexually predatory, and irresponsible. Their deepest yearning is not for wife and family, but for the motorbike and the open road.
Wow.
The male group escape to a primal mode of predatory and immediate gratification. So this is what men are being told. First of all, men are being told this, and women are being told this is what men really inherently are.
Right.
No wonder they're a little bit concerned. If the culture is saying men are all those things, brutal, savage, barbarian, irresponsible, predatory, if the culture is telling men that, of course women are reacting. And then men are reacting to being jumped on. So a lot of, I think, getting them free is getting them free from the secular script so that they realize that that hostility is not against men per se. It's against the secular script and the way that men have been described in the, by the secular world.
I'm seeing this. I'm glad you're bringing this up again because you said it a minute ago, and like I thought, man, that's a big deal. And so, thank you for dividing it, separating those thoughts there. That this script doesn't come from anything other than the secular mentality of men. I didn't know really where it came from, but that, of course, makes sense. It's like they would only talk about the dark side. And we all know that pieces of all that description are unfortunately true for many men, even sometimes in my heart or how I act. Yeah. That's just the way, unfortunately, that sometimes sin goes. But at the end of the day, the redeemed, as the song says, need to say so. And we just we're in the throes of the Charlie Kirk thing recently. That's not just a thing, but when they took his life, and we spoke yesterday, and you've done so well with it today about expressing truth in love, and that this has emboldened us. You've emboldened us today by speaking truth to be the man that we're created to be, not the one that we're told we need to be or that we're described as that we supposedly are. So that what you've really paraphrased in the last, I guess, 45 minutes or so of exactly why we started Stand Up Dude. It's a offering to encourage young men to be the man that they're created to be. And I like to describe it as we're not calling men out, we're calling them forward to be the man they're created to be, and we're reminding them who they are instead of who they are told they are.
That does remind me that you asked an earlier question that we never finished. Do you remember you asked me at the beginning about the two competing scripts for masculinity?
Yes, definitely.
It fits in very well here now because this was a sociological study by a sociologist who's well known, and so he speaks all around the world. And so he came up with a very clever experiment where he would ask young men two questions. He would ask them, and remember, this is global, countries all around the world. He would ask them first, what does it mean to be a good man? You're at a funeral, and in the eulogy, somebody says he was a good man. What does that mean? And he said all around the world, young men had no trouble answering that. They would immediately start listing duty, honor, integrity, sacrifice, do the right thing, be a provider, be a protector, be responsible. And he'd say, where'd you learn that? And they'd just say, I don't know. It's just in the air we breathe. Yeah. And of course, we would say they're made in God's image. Yes. And they do have that inherent, innate sense of what it means to be a good man. But then he would follow up with the second question. And the second question was, what does it mean if I say to you, man up, be a real man? And the young men themselves would say, no, that's completely different. That means be tough, never show weakness, win at all costs, be competitive, play through pain, get rich, get laid, I'm using their language.
Yeah.
And the sociologists concluded that there is this two different scripts for men. On the one hand, that's an inherent knowledge of what it means to be a good man, which I think is very encouraging. But men also feel pressure to live up to this quote unquote real man script, which is not all wrong. Right? I mean, we all want people to be tough in a crisis. But if it's disconnected from a moral vision, it can slide into misogyny, dominance, control, the Andrew Tate phenomenon.
Yes.
And so I thought that was very helpful again, because like what you were saying, we have to help people reconnect with that inner sense that I'm made in God's image, what that means, and disassociate from the cultural messages that men are getting today. And like I said, even the younger men in particular who are reaching out to people like Andrew Tate, they need to be equipped with a critical grid so that they know, no, this is a secular script. This is not the biblical script.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for dividing the truth there. That's beautiful. Like you're like a scientist dissecting and putting it back together for us and go, this is what it's supposed to look like. Yeah. So I honor you and thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing what you do. And thank you.
The book is called The Toxic War on Masculinity, How Christianity Reconciles the Sexes. I got it right that time, I just want to point out. And Nancy Pearcey is the author, Professor Pearcey. We thank you so much for being with us today on Stand Up Dude. And we recommend folks go out, get the book, download the book, whatever. Is there any best platform they can find it on?
Well, Amazon, of course, all the all the typical book places. But I would also like to invite you to come to my website, nancypearcey.com. Sweet. And Pearcey is Pearcey. But nancypearcey.com. Come on over. You can peruse all of my books there and see who endorsed them. And you can even leave a message. I enjoy it when people say, hello, how are you doing?
Yes.
Hey, Nancy, and speaking of endorsing, you gave me one at the NRB and you signed it and I took a picture with you. Let me show you right here.
There we go.
That hair is doing some overtime over there. Yeah. Settle down. Anyway, that's really an honoring day, and I've shown many people that picture.
Yep. Well, thank you, Nancy. We appreciate you taking the time with us today. And again, folks, if you want to grab her book, we highly recommend it. And if you're like me, you won't be happy with just one. You'll need multiple copies and multiple books. And fortunately, there are plenty of your books to go around. So check them all out. And thank you again, Nancy. We look forward to having you back on Stand Up Dude.
It's an honor to have you. And you guys reach out to Nancy Pearcey with a CEY.com and have her in your church, have her speak at your men's group. And women, have her speak at your women's group. Perfect. Yep. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. Yep. Thank you for righteously and rightfully dividing truth for us here today. And thank you for being Nancy. And we appreciate you. Look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really I appreciate very much your ministry to men.
I appreciate that.
That means a lot because many churches do not have men's groups today. So what you're doing is really valuable.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
We honor you today. Go continue being amazing today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you.